I cleaned the hallways no one ever looked at. That was the point. They called it St. Brenton's Veteran Medical Center, but no one really said the full name. The doctors just called it the ward. The nurses, if they were tired enough, called it the bunker. But to me, it was just where I worked. Every night, 6 to 6. Mopping the same floors, passing the same flickering overhead lights, pretending I didn't see what I saw. I was the cleaner. Not housekeeping. Not janitorial staff. Just the cleaner. I liked it that way. Nobody ever stopped to ask my name. They nodded when I walked by with the mop bucket. Maybe smiled if they weren't in a rush. Some nights I was invisible, even to the security cameras. That's not a metaphor. The old wings had blind spots. I used to know where every one of them was. 15 years of silence. Not just the quiet kind, but the type you grow into. The type that wraps around your ribs and settles deep inside your lungs, like fog that never leaves. I didn't talk about where I'd been. I didn't tell people I once held a scalpel, that I had medals, that my hands knew more about pressure points and blood volume than half the interns rushing around this place. That was another life. Now I wiped up spilled coffee and sometimes blood when a patient coded too fast for the staff to respond. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask questions. I just cleaned. I think I stayed because the building felt like penance. Not punishment exactly, but something like balance. Like if I kept pushing the mop down those sterile corridors long enough, the ghosts would stop trying to follow me home. They didn't, of course. There was one wing of the hospital where I never cleaned. ICU South. Technically, it wasn't off limits, but nobody sent me there and I never volunteered. Not since that night. That wing had too much light. Too many machines. Too much noise pretending to be life. I preferred the older sections where the paint peeled a little, and the vents hummed in a low, broken rhythm. The kind of sound that reminded you were still here. No one really notices you when you're a cleaner. That's what made it perfect. I could disappear every night on purpose. No more choices, no more risks. Just bleach and linoleum and silence. Until that night. Until I turned a corner and saw 3 men in military dress standing outside ICU South, flanked by 2 armed guards. Until the hallway that was always empty suddenly filled with tension you could taste. Until I saw the gurney being wheeled in fast and the faces that came with it. And until I heard the name. Then I knew. The silence I'd built my life around for 15 years was about to shatter. You can always tell when a powerful man is dying because nobody wants to look directly at him. That night didn't smell like bleach. It smelled like rubber soles moving too fast across the waxed floor, like stress sweat and sterile adrenaline. The kind that clung to your skin even when you weren't the one being paged. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped off the service elevator. Usually my floor was dead quiet at 2 a.m., just soft beeps from monitors and the hum of vending machines no one used. But that night, every light in the hallway was on. Nurses moved in pairs, clipped and urgent. 2 orderlies were talking in low voices at the end of the corridor, and the security guard on duty wasn't asleep in his chair for once. He was standing. Not just standing alert, tense. Then I saw them. 3 men in dark suits and over-starched collars, standing outside ICU South. Not hospital staff. These were the other kind. The kind who never gave names, who only came around when someone very high up was dying. And they weren't alone. There were 2 uniformed officers military. One had a holstered sidearm, and the dead-eyed look of someone who'd seen too many last breaths. I stayed with my mop. Pretended to refill my bucket from the janitor's closet. But my eyes kept drifting toward the ICU doors. You learn to read energy in hospitals. It's in the hands, the shoulders, the way people avoid eye contact. And everything about that hallway said the same thing. Something big was breaking. Then I caught a glimpse of the gurney. They wheeled it in through the South Wing service doors. 2 nurses at each side, and 1 trauma surgeon moving like the hallway owed him space. For a second, I didn't recognize the man on the stretcher. His face was swollen, oxygen mask on, skin gray like bad marble. But his hand, that was the tell. A large, weathered hand with a deep scar slicing down between thumb and forefinger. I'd stitched that wound once, a long time ago, in a different country under a tarp, while bullets cracked in the dirt. My grip tightened on the mop handle. They were calling him General. General Alden Shore. But I knew him by a different name. To them, he was a war hero, a strategist, a 4-star legend. To me, he was the man I saved when I still believed in saving people. The man who'd once looked me in the eye and promised, "I'll make sure you're protected." He didn't. And now, he was dying in the same hospital that had pretended I didn't exist for over a decade. The irony was so sharp I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned against the wall invisible again, watching them work, watching them panic, watching the machines fail one by one. It was happening too fast, and nobody knew what to do, except me. But I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be the cleaner. The man I pulled back from death once signed the papers that ended my life. They called him Alden Shore now, but that wasn't always his name. Back in Kandahar, the unit called him Iron Jack. No one dared say it to his face, but we all used it in the tents after hours, over cheap instant coffee and chalky protein bars. He was the kind of commander people followed, even when they hated him. Sharp, calculating, unforgiving. And on a Tuesday night during our second deployment, he bled out in my lap. They'd been ambushed on a reconnaissance trail. 3, dead 1, critically wounded. When they dragged him in, his throat was already gurgling. The medic froze. Everyone else screamed for the helo that wasn't coming. And I, just a trauma nurse with a battlefield commission and no rank, cut open his fatigues and clamped his artery with my bare fingers. I kept him alive for 19 minutes before help arrived. 19 minutes with his eyes wide open looking straight into mine. He lived. And 6 months later, when a field report went wrong and blame had to be assigned, his signature was at the bottom of the disciplinary file that ended my military career. Insubordination, they said. Unauthorized medical action. Breaking chain of command. Technically, they were right. But I had saved his life. I never forgot that scar across his hand. I'd stitched it right after I saved his neck. He'd nearly lost the thumb. The wound split at an ugly angle. No plastic surgery could clean up that line. It was still there. Same hand. Same man. Same silence when it mattered most. I remember standing there gripping the mop, wondering what it said about me that I wasn't angry, that I didn't want revenge. I just felt tired, like a thread had been pulled loose in my chest. And finally, there was a name to the feeling I'd been mopping around for 15 years. He had survived, and I had disappeared. And now he was back in my world. Not in uniform, not commanding anything. Just lying there with a machine breathing for him, and no one left in the room who knew what he owed. No one except me. Everyone froze. So I moved. From where I stood, I could see the heart monitor flatlining in real time. One long, unbroken tone, the kind that cuts through even the thickest silence and makes people forget how to breathe. There were 3 nurses in the room. 1 doctor. 2 military aides. They all hesitated not from lack of skill, but from protocol. High clearance cases always came with rules. Wait for the attending, follow the chain of command. Do nothing unauthorized. So they stood still, watching the life leave his body. I'd seen this before. That 1 second of collective paralysis, where everyone forgets what comes next. In the field, hesitation killed. In hospitals, it did something worse. It delayed. The younger nurse reached for the crash cart too late. Someone dropped a clipboard. And that was it. My body moved before I told it to. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just walked forward. Past the security guard who wasn't paying attention. Past the 2 aides who were too busy whispering into their radios. Right up to the glass door. Nobody stopped me. They were all looking at the monitor. 1 flat line. 1 dying man. And 1 cleaner, stepping into a room she hadn't entered in 15 years. I pushed open the door and walked into ICU South. The nurse closest to me turned confused. She opened her mouth to ask who I was, but I was already beside the bed, already pulling off the gloves she hadn't put on fast enough, already pressing 2 fingers to the carotid. No pulse. Still warm, though. Still a window. Maybe 60 seconds, if that. Behind me, someone said, "You can't be in here." I ignored them. "I need gauze and 2 clamps," I said calmly, scanning the crash kit with 1 hand, while repositioning his head with the other. "Now." They didn't move. I said now. This time, my voice hit a note that wasn't asking. The nurse handed me the tray without another word. I could feel it, the weight of the decision I was making. This wasn't just an intervention. It was exposure. The life I'd buried was crawling its way back into the room, heartbeat by heartbeat, but I didn't hesitate. Because for 15 years, I'd cleaned up after other people's mistakes. Tonight, I wasn't going to let them clean up after mine. I hadn't spoken to anyone in that building in years. Not really. Not like that. The security guard's name was Ray. I knew because his ID badge said so. We'd crossed paths maybe 100 times, maybe more. He once offered me a stale granola bar on a double shift. I nodded. That was the closest we'd ever come to a conversation, so when I stepped away from the ICU room and walked straight up to him, he didn't recognize the shift right away. Not until I said it. I can save him. Just 3 words. Simple. Unremarkable. But they tasted like blood and metal in my mouth. Ray blinked eyes, scanning my uniform. His hand hovered near his radio. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You can't be in this area." "I already was," I replied. "I'm telling you I can save him." His eyebrows knit. "Are you a doctor?" "No." He looked confused, then skeptical. "Then I'm gonna have to ask you to step back." I almost did. It would have been easy. Surrender was second nature by now. 15 years of stepping back. Of saying nothing, of disappearing into floors and shadows and bleach. But something in me stayed rooted. I was a field nurse in the 71st Combat Support Hospital. Iraq. Afghanistan. 2 tours. I was the one who kept Alden Shore alive the first time he tried to die. That got his attention. He didn't move. But something in his posture changed. Like a man trying to remember a name he should have known. "I'm not asking for a promotion," I said. "Not a medal. I don't even want to stay. But he has maybe 4 minutes left, and I know what to do. I've done it before. You can either let me in or watch them let him go." Ray hesitated, looked down the hallway, looked at me again. The cleaner. The woman he'd passed 1,000 times without remembering. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Margot," I said quietly. "Margot Delaney." He stared, then without a word, he stepped aside. I exhaled slowly. The moment didn't feel like victory. It felt like stepping off a ledge you'd spent a lifetime trying not to see. But I was in now. Not in the room. Not just physically. In the story again. And whether I liked it or not, I just made myself visible. She looked at me like I was a threat, but beneath that was someone praying for a miracle she didn't believe in. I was scrubbing blood off my hands in the ICU sink when she came in. She wore a navy wool coat over hospital scrubs too formal, for staff too tired for press. Her bun had started to unravel, and her eyes, they didn't scan the room like a visitor. They searched it like someone already preparing for goodbye. I recognized that look. It was the same one I'd seen on wives clutching dog tags, on mothers clutching nothing. She didn't say a word at first, just stared at the man on the bed, pale still tubes snaking from his body, like vines choking what was left of him. Then she turned and saw me. You can always tell when someone knows your face, but can't place it. Her mouth parted slightly, her forehead creased, and then, just like that, the wall came up. "Who are you?" she asked. "Just someone who was nearby," I said quietly. "That doesn't answer the question." I glanced at the nurse behind her, but she was already backing out. Probably thought this was family business. In a way it was. "I'm Margot Delaney," I said. "I used to serve with your father." Sarah didn't blink. "Where Afghanistan? Kandahar base, 2010. Now her gaze narrowed. "You're not on any of his care teams?" "No." "Then why were you in his room?" I could have given her the whole story right then about the battlefield, about the arterial clamp, about the signature that cost me everything. But that wouldn't have helped her trust me, and I needed her to trust me. "Because I know what to do," I said simply. "He crashed. Everyone froze. I didn't." Silence. "Then so you just walked in?" "I didn't ask for permission." She crossed her arms, holding herself tight. "That's not how this works." "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it's why he's still breathing." Her lip twitched. Just a flicker. The mask of control slipped, and I saw the daughter beneath the uniform, the woman not ready to lose her father. "Why should I believe you?" "You don't have to," I said. "But if you don't, and he dies, you'll wonder for the rest of your life if you missed the one chance that mattered. That did it. Not a breakdown. Not tears. Just the smallest breath hitch in her chest." Her eyes dropped to the floor, and when she looked back at me, the suspicion hadn't vanished, but something else had cracked open underneath. Hope. Just enough to let me in. She had no reason to believe me, but sometimes reason is exactly what breaks us. Sarah didn't speak for a long time. She paced. I stood by the wall, not moving, not offering more than I already had. Because truth is, I didn't have more. No ID badge, no official record, no resume to hand over. Everything they'd erased 15 years ago, I let them. It was easier that way. "You're asking me to gamble my father's life," Sarah finally said. "No," I replied softly. "I'm telling you the hand's already been dealt. I'm just the last card left to play." She stared at me as if trying to strip the uniform from my body with her eyes, as if peeling back layers would somehow reveal something clean, something certified, something explainable. But there was nothing. Only a woman in scuffed shoes' hands, still faintly shaking, heart thudding from holding on too long. "You said you served with him," she said, "that you saved him once." "I did." "Then why doesn't he remember you?" I exhaled through my nose. "Because he chose not to." She flinched. That hit somewhere. I didn't elaborate. There are some truths that sound petty when said out loud. Some betrayals that only carry weight in silence. If I'd gone on, told her about the investigation, the scapegoating, the paper trail that vanished after a single signature, she would have shut down. So I left it at that. She turned her back, running a hand through her hair. Behind the door, the machines continued their rhythm. Beep, pulse, hiss, holding her father between worlds. I knew that sound. I'd listened to it the night my brother didn't make it. It's not loud. That's the trick. It's steady. Too steady. It lulls you into thinking there's still time. "You don't look like a nurse," she said quietly. "I'm not. Not anymore." She looked over her shoulder. So, what are you now? Someone who doesn't want you to live with the kind of guilt that never runs out of new ways to hurt. That silenced her again. She walked to the door, peeked inside. The doctor still hadn't returned. The nurses were watching, waiting, hoping someone would tell them what to do next. Sarah swallowed hard. Then she stepped back and opened the door wide. "Go," she said. No fanfare, no handshake. Just one woman letting go, and another stepping into the space left behind. I walked through the doorway, not because I knew I'd succeed, but because she'd just done the bravest thing anyone could do. She chose to believe someone nobody else saw. I wasn't supposed to be there, but neither was death, not yet. Sarah didn't say much when she signed the emergency release form. Her hands were steady, but her jaw tightened with every pen stroke. She didn't read the fine print. No one ever does when it's someone they love on the table. She slid the clipboard to the attending nurse, then looked at me. "This doesn't make you untouchable," she said. "I don't need to be untouchable," I replied. "Just useful." She nodded once, and that was the last thing we said. I pushed open the ICU door and stepped into a room lit too bright for comfort. Every beep and hiss of the machines felt louder now, like they knew I wasn't supposed to be here. He lay still, face pale beneath the oxygen mask chest, rising in shallow bursts that weren't his own. The ventilator did the work, but barely. His vitals told a story I'd seen before, failing organs, unstable pressure, electrical rhythm, stuttering like a drunk man on a frozen lake. The staff had pulled back, unsure of protocol. They looked at me like I was either a miracle or a lawsuit. I didn't care. I didn't touch the equipment. I didn't issue commands. I went straight to the body I'd once cradled under open sky and sandstorm. His hand was cold now, but not empty. Still something left to catch. I leaned over him, adjusted the cervical collar gently, then placed my fingers on the pressure point just below his sternum. Back then, I didn't have tools. No crash cart, no guidance beyond instinct and experience, just adrenaline and dirt, and a sense that I would not lose someone else that day. That's who I was now. Not a surgeon, not a savior, just a woman who once stopped death with her hands. The nurse stepped closer. "Do you need—" "No," I said. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately across his ribcage. I was feeling for something they didn't teach in textbooks feedback. Resistance. Subtle shifts in muscle and breath. What we called the silent fight in field medicine. Some people had it. Some didn't. Alden did. I remembered. Because I'd felt it before. That stubborn, grinding spark buried under tissue and trauma. I was counting on it still being there. The vitals dipped again. I closed my eyes and pushed. Not hard. Just enough. Just in the right place. A vector between pressure and trust. He didn't move, but the monitor did. A blip. Another. Then a pause. Then another. Behind me, someone gasped, but I kept my hand where it was waiting to see if he'd hold the rhythm, or if it would all fade back to flatline. Not yet, I thought. Not this time. And he didn't. Field medicine doesn't ask for permission. It just asks if you're willing to be wrong. There was a time when I carried a full trauma pack on my back and could restart a failing heart in under 90 seconds, with nothing more than pressure breath and a busted adrenaline vial. That time had long passed, but my hands hadn't forgotten. I crouched beside the gurney, sliding off the gloves they gave me. Latex dulls sensation. I needed every millimeter of touch I could get. His skin was clammy. No perfusion to the extremities. His left shoulder slumped, nerve fatigue from the spinal tension. Classic sympathetic collapse. Modern medicine would have called for epinephrine a crash cart intubation protocols. But modern medicine had already failed. I pressed gently along the intercostal space, feeling for the sweet spot, the one between pain and reflex. It's where the body hides its last flicker of resistance, where breath can be coaxed rather than forced. One of the younger nurses hovered nearby. I could feel her watching me, unsure whether to speak or run for help. I know what I'm doing. I murmured more to the man on the table than to her, because I wasn't just trying to trigger a response. I was asking his body to remember. Kandahar, summer 2010. We'd been under mortar fire for hours. No evac, no power. 2 of our best medics already gone. They brought him in on a door panel, bleeding from the gut pulse weaker than the wind. We had no IVs. I used water mixed with powdered electrolyte packets. No painkillers. Just 2 sticks to bite on, and a promise that if he made it through the hour, he'd never owe me a thing. He made it. I never asked for repayment. But I remembered how his body responded then, how it tensed, not in fear, but in refusal. He wasn't a man who accepted dying easily. So I worked now like I had worked then. No machines, no help. Just my hands, and the memory of what muscle and breath feel like when they're about to surrender. I pressed along the vagus nerve channel, delicate, deliberate, then shifted to the diaphragm zone. A trick from a Syrian medic I trained with years ago. He used to call it talking to the lungs. And if I was right, then the rhythm would catch. If I was wrong, then at least I wouldn't have stood there and watched him die from protocol paralysis. Suddenly a twitch in his right hand. Not spasm response. My fingers stilled. There it was. The beginning of fight. And maybe, just maybe, the start of forgiveness. The first time I pulled him back from the edge, it wasn't in a sterile room. It was in the dirt under fire, with nothing but instinct between us and death. The sound of his breath, now shallow, forced, mechanical, dragged me backward. Not in fear, in memory. Suddenly, I wasn't in ICU anymore. I was back in the desert. Kandahar, July 2010. We'd been running hot for 3 days, working off 2 hours of sleep and freeze-dried rations. The dust never settled. The sky never dimmed. And the radios never stopped crackling. I'd been patching up a corporal with shrapnel in his thigh when the explosion hit. It shook. The tints knocked over the supply crates. Someone screamed. A medic rushed in and yelled, "We've got command down." They brought him in on a makeshift stretcher, 2 planks and a tarp soaked in blood. I didn't recognize him at first. His helmet was gone, uniform shredded. But the insignia was there. A general. Everyone backed away. Rank paralyzes people, even in chaos. They waited for orders, but I didn't. I dropped the tourniquet I'd been holding, slid to my knees beside him, and tore open what was left of his vest. Lower abdominal wound. Deep, jagged, bleeding fast, too fast. Pulse barely. IV, none left. I didn't ask again. I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed the cautery rod we heated over a portable stove, and got to work. There was no morphine, no anesthesia, just a man losing more blood than we could replace, and a field nurse willing to burn flesh to keep him here. He didn't scream, didn't pass out either. He just stared at me, jaw-clenched hands gripping the dirt, and let me do what had to be done. I remember the sand turning black, where it soaked through his uniform. I remember yelling over the gunfire, telling the others to hold the tarp higher, to block the sun, because I couldn't see the wound clearly. I remember pressing my whole weight into his abdomen to slow the bleeding, not caring that my own hands were cramping, shaking blistered from heat and pressure. And I remember he lived. Barely. The chopper came 20 minutes later. They took him, didn't even ask my name. He never looked back. Never asked who kept him alive when the sky rained metal and the world went dark. Until now. Now he couldn't look. But I could. I looked straight at the man I once saved and thought, "Don't you dare leave before I get to say what you should have heard 15 years ago. They called it superstition, guesswork, dangerous, but it worked." The monitors weren't telling me anything useful. His vitals hovered at the edge enough to fool the machines, not enough to mean survival. The oxygen was flowing. The chart showed a barely registering pulse. But I knew that look. The body was preparing to let go. I'd seen it too many times in the field, how stillness pretends to be stability, right before everything crashes. The attending physician poked his head in, glanced at the readings, and gave the same nod they all do when they've already accepted the outcome. "Let us know if he goes," he told the nurse. Goes, like it was a meeting he might be late to. They didn't know what I was doing. I didn't tell them, because the thing I was about to try wasn't in their textbooks. I positioned my hands carefully left palm on the third rib, right fingers angled under the clavicle. It wasn't a resuscitation posture, not compression, not cardiac massage. It was something else. We used to call it transfer alignment, a pressure-based trigger pattern developed from a mix of old battlefield lore and nervous system mapping. Most doctors laughed at it. Some called it witchcraft. Others just said it was dangerous and unproven. But I'd used it. Twice. Both times when nothing else worked. Both times when the patient had already been given up on. It's not about shocking the heart. It's about speaking to the body in its own language, tapping into reflex arcs triggering buried survival responses, realigning breath and nerve under duress. I closed my eyes, breathed in, pushed gently just enough to tilt the axis of the rib toward the diaphragm using my fingers to lift the vagus node near the collarbone. He didn't move. Neither did the monitor. I adjusted the angle, re-centered, tried again. Still nothing. One of the nurses whispered behind me. I heard the word delusional. Maybe I was. But then beneath my left palm I felt it a faint catch. Not a beat. A resistance. Like the body flinching from the edge. I stayed with it. Pressed again. The monitor blinked once, then twice, then the faintest uptick in oxygen saturation. I didn't speak. Didn't move my hands. I just waited. It wasn't a miracle. It was muscle memory from his body and mine. The technique that got me blacklisted was bringing him back, and no one in the room knew what to call it. No applause, no recognition, just one breath, then another. The room held its breath, and then the monitor blinked. A single spike, then a pause, another spike. The tone changed. That long, dreadful flat line gave way to the slow, uncertain chirp of a pulse, reclaiming its rhythm. I didn't move. Not right away. You never trust the first signal. The body can be cruel like that, offering a flicker, then vanishing for good. But then the numbers shifted again. Oxygen saturation ticked upward. His chest began to rise not mechanically, but on its own. Shallow. But his. One of the nurses gasped. Another took a step toward the bed, then froze, not sure what she was witnessing. I stayed crouched for a moment longer, feeling the weight of his pulse against my fingers. Weak, but present. He was back. Not out of danger. Not stable, but alive. And that was more than anyone in this room had expected 10 minutes ago. I stood up slowly, my knees aching from time spent too long in silence, too long out of purpose. My hands were slick with sweat and pressure. I peeled off the second pair of gloves I'd thrown on halfway through the process and tossed them in the biohazard bin without a word. No one stopped me. No one asked what I did. They didn't know what to say. They had watched something happen. They didn't understand. And in the absence of understanding, most people choose denial. I walked to the sink. washed my hands with the kind of care I used to teach fingertips, to wrist under the nails no wasted motion. Then I dried them on a disposable towel and dropped it gently into the trash. Behind me, the machine kept chirping. He was breathing on his own. I didn't look back at him, not out of spite, not even out of pride. It just wasn't about me anymore. He was alive. That was the point. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Sarah was there, pacing, fists clenched, trying not to hope too hard. When she saw me, her mouth opened, but I didn't let her speak. "He's back," I said. Just that. Her eyes filled, but she nodded like a soldier receiving orders. I kept walking, past the nurses, past the security desk, back into the quiet part of the hospital where I belonged, because I wasn't here to reclaim anything. I came to return something that was never mine to keep. You can save a life and still leave the building unnoticed. That's the difference between being seen and being known. The morning shift was just starting when I clocked out. Same way I always did badge swipe, gray jacket, coffee breath in the hall. The new staff shuffled in, shoulders hunched against the fluorescent lights, and the weight of another 12-hour shift. No one looked up. No one stopped me. The hallway I walked through still smelled like bleach and overripe flowers. Someone must have left a sympathy bouquet by the wrong door. The petals were wilted, the water cloudy. I passed the front desk. The receptionist, a new girl with tired eyes and a chipped manicure, didn't glance up. I was just another night shadow disappearing at dawn. It used to bother me. 15 years of silence doesn't come without resentment. You learn to bury it deep under routines, under humility, under a mop handle, and a stack of folded linens. But this time, it didn't bother me, because for once I wasn't invisible to myself. I'd gone into that ICU room for reasons I couldn't even articulate. Not revenge, not redemption. Something in between. Maybe I just wanted to prove to him, to me, to no one that the fire hadn't gone out, that the hands still worked, that the instinct hadn't betrayed me. The automatic doors hissed open. Outside, the sky was barely pink, streaked with the cold gray of early spring. The wind scraped at my cheeks as I stepped out into the parking lot gravel, crunching beneath my boots. My car sat where it always did. Far corner. No shade. No camera. I got in. Didn't turn the key right away. Just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield. The world looked the same. But I didn't. Not in a grand cinematic way. No triumphant music. No flash of realization. Just a quiet shift. Like something had settled. Like a part of me had been waiting 15 years to breathe. I exhaled, started the engine, and drove away. No one waved. No one asked where I'd been. But for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. You'd think saving a life would leave a trail. It didn't. She vanished like she was never there. I stayed by my father's side for 12 hours after his vitals stabilized. He didn't wake, but his color returned. His breathing held steady. And the cardiologist, once cold and detached, now whispered updates like prayers. No one could explain the turnaround. Spontaneous autonomic correction, one doctor said. Lucky timing, another offered. But I'd seen it. I saw the woman place her hands where no textbook told her to. I saw the monitor blink back to life the moment she touched him. And now she was gone. I asked the nurses first. Who was the woman in his room this morning? Blank looks, shrugs. One said I thought she was with you. I checked the visitor log. No entry under the name Margot Delaney. I checked staff records. Nothing. No Margot. No Delaney. No part-time RNs. No night shift trauma personnel. No floats. I pulled aside the janitorial lead, an older man named Carl, who'd been working there longer than me. "Do we have a cleaner named Margot?" I asked. He scratched his head. "We have a lot of folks come and go," he said. "No one by that name lately, far as I remember." I checked the security footage. Most of it was missing. Corrupted timestamp, the report said. Glitch in the backup system. I stared at the blank spaces where she should have been. The hallway outside ICU South. The service corridor. The main exit. All blind. Like she never existed. But I knew she had. There was no mistaking the way she moved, like someone who didn't need permission to act. Like someone who'd already failed once, and wouldn't let it happen again. I found the gloves she'd used tossed into the biohazard bin. But no fingerprints. No DNA run possible without a formal request, and I knew how that would go. No chain of custody. No reason to dig. Besides, they wouldn't understand. To them, she was a ghost. To me, she was the one person who had done something when everyone else froze. And I had let her walk away. Part of me wanted to scream, to storm into administration and demand they find her, recognize her, reinstate her, whatever she had lost. But another part, the part that had seen death up close, understood. Some people don't want to be found. Some people don't come to stay. They come to do the one thing no one else can, and then disappear before the world remembers how much it needs them. The past has a way of resurfacing, sometimes not in memory, but in proof you thought you'd buried. I was rummaging through my father's duffel bag when I found it. Not the leather one he took to meetings, or the regulation satchel marked property of U.S. Army. No, this was different. Older. Scuffed. Smelled like cedar and dust. Buried beneath extra clothes and unused razor blades. The zipper creaked when I opened it. Inside were bits of a man he'd never shared with me. A metal compass with initials etched on the back. A faded notebook filled with coordinates and dates. And tucked between 2 pages a photograph. It wasn't glossy. Matte paper yellowed edges, corners curling. I almost overlooked it. Then I turned it over. And there she was. Covered in sweat arms, bare sleeves rolled up and soaked in blood. Her hands were mid-action pressing gauze into a torn abdomen, kneeling in the dirt beside a soldier whose face was half shadowed by the angle. But not too shadowed. I knew that jawline, that grimace. It was my father. You could see the pain on his face, and you could see something else in hers, focus, not panic. The look of someone who had done this before, and would do it again if needed. The patch on her vest read Delaney. I turned the photo over. In my father's handwriting, sharp blocky letters, Kandahar, 10. She kept me breathing. I sat down. For a long time, I just held the photo in my lap, letting the silence fill the space between then and now. He'd kept it. All these years. Hidden, maybe. But not thrown away. Not forgotten. He remembered. He remembered everything. And yet, he let her vanish. I stood and walked back into the hospital room. My father was still asleep, but his breathing was easier now. More natural. His fingers twitched slightly on the blanket. I sat beside him, laid the photo on the tray near his hand, and waited. Minutes passed. Then his eyes opened sluggish, heavy, but aware. He saw me, then saw the photo. His gaze locked on it like something clicked inside him. A long breath escaped his lips. His voice was gravel. "And Jess, Margot." Just one word, but it was enough. I was good at disappearing. But that morning, for the first time, I didn't want to. I didn't go straight home. I parked by the old pier, the one behind the shipping yard, where no one came, unless they were lost or wanted to be. I'd been coming here since the discharge, 15 years of sitting in the same dented car, watching the same gulls fight over trash, waiting for the day the weight would lift. It never did. But something was different now. I kept hearing the monitor in my head, that soft beep, beep, like a second chance ticking out of thin air. He was alive. Because of me. And yet, I'd left like a ghost. Old habits die hard. My whole life since the court-martial had been about staying out of sight. No attachments. No explanations. Even my job title was designed for invisibility. Cleaner. I liked it that way. At least I used to. But now, I wasn't so sure. There was a knock at the window. Just the wind, probably, but it startled me. I stared at my own reflection in the glass. Same tired face. Same creases at the mouth that never used to be there. But the eyes, they weren't the same. They looked called. I remembered Sarah's face. The way she said nothing but everything at once. The desperation, the disbelief. And finally, the trust. She'd opened the door. And I'd slipped out before anyone could ask me to stay. I thought that was strength. Now it felt like fear. I'd walked out of that hospital thinking I was doing what I always did, cleaning up and moving on. But I wasn't just leaving a job. I was walking away from the last thread that still connected me to who I used to be. And maybe I couldn't outrun that anymore. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. I started the engine, drove 2 blocks, pulled over again. Something in my chest ached, not from regret, not even from guilt. It was recognition. Like for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at me and not seen a stain to scrub out. But a person worth asking back in. And that terrified me more than war ever had. I saved him once, and they punished me for it. People think getting kicked out of the military comes with noise courtrooms shouting headlines. Mine came with a folder and a locked door. No ceremony, no argument, just a signature and silence. It happened 3 weeks after I saved his life. At Kandahar base, everything was quiet again. The wounds were healing his, and the missions, and I was back in the makeshift infirmary, stitching up sprained ankles in dehydration cases. Then, I got called in. They said I violated protocol, that I performed a high-risk, unauthorized medical intervention without clearance from ranking command. I said, there was no ranking command in that tent. There was no one else. They nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't deny that I'd saved his life. But still, the papers came. Dishonorable, I asked. No, they said. Administrative discharge. Quiet. Why quiet? Because the man you saved can't afford to admit he was down. That's what it came down to. Image. They couldn't write into the record that a field nurse broke the chain of command to stop a 4-star general from bleeding out under enemy fire. So they buried it. And me with it. I didn't even get a hearing. Just a plane ticket home and a warning. Don't make noise. I didn't. I disappeared into civilian life the way I'd learned to do everything else efficiently, invisibly. I got certified for custodial work. Took night shifts. Stayed out of the way. 15 years. 15 years of watching people try and fail to save lives, knowing I could have helped, but not daring to touch. Because the one time I did, it cost me everything. Sometimes I still hear the words they used: reckless, insubordinate, uncontrolled. But I also hear the sound of his pulse returning under my hands. I hear the wheeze of breath he took that wasn't supposed to come. I hear the chopper blades overhead that day, when they finally lifted him out alive, because I made a call no one else dared to make. So, yeah, I broke protocol, and I'd do it again. Because that's what medicine in war is. It's not clean, it's not polite. It's you and death in a staring match and no time to wait for clearance. This time, there were no bullets, no dirt, no fire, but it felt exactly the same, and I didn't flinch. They said I was reckless, but the truth is, I kept my mouth shut to protect someone else. The part that still wakes me up sometimes. It wasn't the blood, or the sound of his breathing failing under my hands. It was the moment after. The silence in the debriefing room. The folder on the table. The question no one asked. Why did I act without orders? They assumed it was pride, or adrenaline, or ego. But the truth, I was covering for someone. The medic on shift that night. Kyle Jensen had frozen. First tour, just a kid. Great in the classroom fast with a pressure wrap, but that night, he broke. I don't blame him. He saw a man torn open from the hip to the ribs. No backup. No doctor. Gunfire still popping in the distance. And he froze. He dropped the kit. He backed into the corner of the tent and muttered, I can't. I could have said something later. Told command he panicked. Shifted blame where it belonged. But he had 6 more months in country. A wife back home pregnant with twins. And if they'd branded him unstable, he'd be sent back in disgrace. No pension, no career. So I said nothing. Took full responsibility for the field procedure. Didn't mention Kyle. Didn't mention the miscommunication that delayed the medevac team. Didn't mention that no one else was even willing to put hands on the general until I did. I thought they'd see the outcome and weigh it against the rule I broke. But that's not how the system works. The higher the rank, the quieter the truth. They wrote me out like a clerical error. No trial, no statement, just a signature. I kept Kyle's name clean. He stayed in, got promoted. We haven't spoken since. I don't think he even knows what I gave up for him, and I don't need him to. That's not why I did it. But sometimes when I walk past certain rooms in the hospital ones, where a new nurse stares too long at a crash cart, where someone hesitates at the edge of a decision, I feel the weight of that night again. The moment when I chose loyalty over justice, and justice never came, until now. And even then, it didn't knock on my door. It flatlined, and I walked in again. He didn't remember my face, but he signed the line that erased my name. He was sitting up in the hospital bed when I walked in again. His skin had color now. The oxygen mask was gone. The machines were quieter. He looked less like a dying man, more like a general recovering from another war. Only this time, the battle wasn't on the outside. He looked at me for a long time, like someone staring at a scar they forgot they had. Margot, he said slowly. I nodded. I remember you. I didn't respond, not because I didn't believe him, but because I didn't know what to do with it now. He cleared his throat, wincing slightly. You were there. Kandahar, you saved my life. Yes, I said, and then you signed the discharge papers that took mine apart. He flinched just slightly, like a man hit with a truth he'd managed to dodge for years. I didn't. It wasn't personal, he said. I know. I didn't write the report, but you approved it. He looked down at his hands, old, weathered, the same hands that had gripped a weapon, written commendations, ordered airstrikes, and signed off on a decision that cost me everything. There was pressure, he said. Media. Command. They couldn't afford the optics of a general almost dying in a tent, with no proper chain of care. So you let them erase me. He didn't answer that, and he didn't need to, because silence was its own confession. After a moment, he looked up again, eyes glassy, not from tears, but from something worse recognition. You were the only one who moved. Everyone else froze, including me. I didn't correct him. He wasn't frozen that night. He was bleeding out, vulnerable in a way that terrified him then, and probably still did now. I was told you acted out of line, that you overstepped. I did, I said, but I saved your life anyway. He nodded slowly. They told me you'd be fine, that you'd find something else. I smiled at that, not kindly. I found a mop. He closed his eyes, let out a slow breath that felt heavier than any apology. I should have said something. You still can, I said. Not for me. I've learned to live in the dark. But there are others like me. People who act before asking. People who care more about the patient than the paperwork. He looked at me, and this time I saw it not guilt, but grief. Not for what happened. For the 15 years, he didn't have the courage to face it. I let him go a long time ago. What I haven't done is let myself breathe. I found Sarah in the hallway. She'd been standing by the vending machine, hands in the pockets of her coat, eyes unfocused. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. Just gave a small nod, like she'd been waiting. He told me everything she said. I nodded. I figured. There was a long pause. I didn't know any of it, she added. About what happened. About what you did. What he didn't. I know. I think. He's sorry. He should be, I said, then softer. But that doesn't change what happened. Sarah looked down. I don't think he knows how to ask for forgiveness. That's the thing, I said quietly. He doesn't need to. She looked up at me, startled. I met her eyes. I already forgave him. Years ago. Maybe not with words, but inside. Then why? She started, then stopped. You want to know why I'm still angry, I said. Why I still walk like someone who's hiding from her own shadow. She didn't speak, because I never forgave myself. That landed heavy. I could see it hit her not with sympathy, but with recognition. That quiet ache of someone who knows what it's like to live with guilt that doesn't wear a name. I broke a rule, I said. And yes, I saved a life. But the part that haunts me isn't the punishment. It's the silence that followed. The way I let them take everything from me, and never once fought back. Sarah stepped closer. You did fight, she said. Just not in the way people expect. I let that sit. For 15 years, I told myself I was keeping my head down, being strong. But really, I was punishing myself for not being stronger, louder, bolder when it mattered. Forgiving him was easy. Forgiving the woman who didn't defend herself. That's harder. But maybe this was the start. Maybe stepping back into the room, back into the fight, back into the truth. Maybe that was the first swing I'd taken in years, and maybe it didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be honest. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes weren't judging me. They were steady and kind. I exhaled. I'm not sure what comes next, I said. Maybe that's okay, she replied. And for the first time in a long, long time, I almost believed her. She didn't come with guilt. She came with a notebook. It was a quiet Saturday when Sarah showed up. I was folding linens in the back of the supply closet, part habit, part ritual, when I heard the knock. Not loud. Just 2 taps and a pause. I opened the door expecting a nurse or a delivery. It was her. Still in civilian clothes, hair pulled back tighter than it needed to be, jaw-locked, like someone bracing for pushback. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. Then she held up a small notebook. Spiral-bound black cover military issue. I don't want an apology, she said, and I'm not here to give one. I raised an eyebrow. All right. She flipped the notebook open. I want you to teach me what you did. I blinked. The procedure, she said. The alignment technique. The pressure points. The way you use the diaphragm to trigger autonomic recovery. Field work, I said. She nodded. Exactly. The kind they don't teach anymore. I leaned against the doorframe. Why? Because I saw it work, she said plainly. And because I think there are people like you out there. Quiet, capable, overlooked. And maybe the system failed them. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from them. Her voice didn't tremble. This wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt-talking. It was curiosity and respect. I looked down at the notebook. 15 years ago, I would have killed for someone to ask me how it worked. Back then, all I heard was, "Don't ever do that again." And now, here she was, asking, believing. "Sit," I said, gesturing toward the folding chair near the supply rack. She did. I picked up a pair of gloves and a rolled towel, laid them out like old friends. "There's no manual," I said. "This isn't something they diagram in med school." "Good," she said. "That's what I want." I studied her for a second, this woman who had once looked at me like a trespasser, now sitting pen ready like a student. I pointed to the towel. "First lesson, the breath doesn't begin in the lungs. It begins in the signal to survive." She wrote it down. No hesitation. No mockery. Just ink on paper. And something deep inside me shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly, for the first time since the desert. Someone was listening. I never planned to teach again. Then again, I never planned to survive either. It started with 4 people, 2 nurses from ICU, 1 EMT, and a med student who'd been watching from the back hall the morning I brought Walter back. They didn't come because of a flyer. There were no emails, no hospital memos, just whispers. Whispers that the woman who wasn't supposed to be there knew something the textbooks didn't. We met in a storage room on the 3rd floor, unused since before the last remodel. No cameras, no interruptions. Just folding chairs, old stretchers, and a space to breathe. Sarah sat in the corner, notebook open, but she didn't lead. This was mine. The first time I didn't speak for almost a minute. Just stood in front of them and looked. They were young. Too young to have seen what I'd seen, but hungry, focused. Tired in that way. Only hospital staff can be exhausted by systems, not by patients. I nodded once. Then I picked up a worn-out CPR dummy and said, "We're not here to break ribs. We're here to listen to the body when the machines stop making sense." They leaned in, and I started. I showed them how to read muscle tension the way you'd read a heartbeat, how the skin temperature around the clavicle can warn of neuroshock, how to place 2 fingers beneath the 3rd rib, not for pressure, but for response. "This isn't standard," I said. They knew. This won't pass your exams. They didn't care. I walked them through the field alignment method, just like I did in the dust of Kandahar. Except this time, no explosions, no bleeding. Just the weight of my voice, and the sound of pens scratching paper. One of the nurses asked if this was legal. I smiled. Neither is watching someone die when you could have done something. They didn't ask again. By the end of the hour, no one had moved. Phones stayed in pockets. No selfies. No applause. Just quiet minds taking in every piece of knowledge I gave, like it might be their last shot to save someone who matters. When the session ended, they didn't rush out. They stayed, asked questions, offered thanks, not the loud kind, the kind with eye contact. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt something I hadn't dared to want back purpose. Not the kind with medals, the kind that shows up in other people's hands when yours are too tired to keep going. It was supposed to stay in the room, but the truth has a way of leaking out, especially when the world's been starving for something real. The video was only 8 minutes long. Sarah had filmed it quietly, just her phone resting against a box of gauze, half obscured by a stack of folders. You couldn't even see my face clearly, but you could hear me. My voice explaining the rib point alignment. My hands moving slow and deliberate over a practice dummy. My words. When nothing else works, this still might. She didn't mean to post it. Not at first. But one of the young nurses had a brother in New York. Trauma unit. He saw the clip while scrolling on his break. Thought it was interesting. Shared it in a closed paramedic group. From there it spread. Fast. Within 72 hours, it had been reposted over 40,000 times. EMT forums, underground Reddit, threads of few obscure Substack newsletters. And then the real thing hit a journalist from Medvox. An investigative health news outlet published a piece titled, "The Silent Hands Behind General Kincaid's Recovery." It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. The article dug into hospital records, noted the inconsistencies, the missing logs, the security footage malfunction. It quoted unnamed staff who remembered a woman in janitorial blues stepping into ICU just before the vitals turned around. One anonymous quote hit harder than the rest. She wasn't on the schedule, but she knew exactly what to do, like she'd done it 100 times before. Suddenly the question wasn't just medical, it was political. Who saved General Walter Kincaid's life? And why isn't her name on the report? The hospital's PR team scrambled. They issued a vague statement about collaborative staff effort and internal review, but it only made things worse. Because the public smelled the cover-up. And worse, so did Washington. A week later, a Senate subcommittee on military healthcare transparency sent an informal inquiry to the hospital board. The Department of Defense asked for a review of Kincaid's medical incident. A retired Army medic published a scathing op-ed, "We abandon the best, then wonder why no one steps up." Reporters camped outside the hospital. Some tried to sneak into night shifts. They asked for a name, a photo, a voice. But the woman at the center of it was still scrubbing blood from a hallway floor. Like none of it was happening, like the storm wasn't building outside the walls. Sarah came to see me the day the article hit national press. She stood in the doorway, phone in hand. "It's out there," she said, "and they're coming." I looked at the mop in my hand, then at her, and said quietly, "Let them." I wasn't hiding. But I wasn't showing up for anyone's spectacle either. The hospital administrator called first, then the local press. Then someone from the Department of Veterans Affairs left a voicemail that sounded rehearsed legal and very uncomfortable. They all wanted the same thing, a statement, a comment, a face to match the story. I ignored them for 3 days. Then came the official letter. It was hand-delivered to my locker at the end of the janitorial hall. No return address, just a department seal, and my name misspelled but close enough to sting. "You are formally invited to appear before the Congressional Subcommittee on Military Medical Oversight as a key figure in the Walter Kincaid case." I read it 3 times. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the past. Just bureaucracy dressed as opportunity. Sarah found me that night in the stairwell, where I usually took my breaks to avoid the noise. "They want you to speak," she said. "Tell your side." "I already did," I replied, 15 years ago, with my hands. She didn't argue, didn't beg, just waited. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into my coat pocket, and looked her in the eye. "I won't sit under those lights like some hidden witness they just discovered in a closet," I said. "Not unless he's the one who asks." "Walter," she asked, though she knew the answer. I nodded. He let me take the fall in silence. If he wants me to break it now, he needs to do the same. Sarah swallowed hard. "He's not the man he used to be." "Neither am I," I said, "but dignity doesn't expire. And mine's been collecting dust long enough." She didn't try to convince me after that, because she understood. It wasn't about revenge. It was about being seen not by the world, not by the headlines, but by the one person who for years looked the other way. The program said I'd speak, but no one asked if I'd show up. It was Memorial Day, the kind of morning where flags hung a little heavier, and the sky tried too hard to look solemn. The ceremony was held at Arlington. Big stage, folded chairs, a sea of dress uniforms and polished shoes. Walter Kincaid sat front row chest, full of medals that no longer shone the way they used to. His face looked older now, Not just from time, but from reckoning. He wasn't the man who signed my name off a record. He was the man waiting to see if I'd walk out and sit behind a microphone. The press was everywhere. Cameras, long lenses, notebooks. Looking for the mystery woman who brought a 4-star general back from the edge. I wasn't a mystery. I was just tired. My name had been added to the program 3 days prior without my permission. Just one line buried near the bottom. Closing remarks. Margot Delaney, former field medic, U.S. Army. No rank. No title. Just a name finally written in ink. Sarah had called me the night before. "They'll clear a path if you want it," she said. "And if not, they'll move on. But this time, it'll be on your terms." I told her I'd think about it. And I did. Right up until my boots hit the edge of the marble stairs that morning. I stood just outside the tent, where the speakers gathered watching the rows fill, watching faces I didn't know, pretend they understood who we'd lost. Not just soldiers, but the ones like me. The ones who served then vanished in silence. The MC cleared his throat and began the ceremony. The national anthem. A wreath, 2 names read aloud I hadn't heard since Kandahar. I saw Walter shift in his seat, adjusting the cane he refused to use unless he had to. His eyes scanned the stage once, then again, looking for a ghost. I stayed where I was, hidden in plain sight. Not out of fear, not out of doubt. I was just waiting for something. Something I didn't even know I needed yet. And the mic hadn't called me. Not yet. I didn't plan to speak. But when silence becomes a habit breaking, it is the bravest thing you can do. They were reading the final tribute when I moved. No fanfare. No music swelling in the background. Just the quiet creak of boots on marble. A few heads turned. Then more. And by the time I reached the side of the stage, the entire crowd had shifted slightly, like wind through a field. The coordinator looked at me confused, almost panicked. I nodded once. "It's all right," I said. "I'm supposed to be here." He stepped aside. I walked to the podium. No cue card, no speech, just breath. Walter looked up at me, eyebrows, drawn eyes, glassy. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. We'd already said everything important without speaking. The mic buzzed faintly. I leaned toward it. "My name," I said slowly, "is Margot Delaney." You could feel it ripple. In the chairs, in the press pit, in the back row where a few medics stood with arms crossed and eyes wide. It was the first time I'd said it out loud in a room full of uniforms, since the day they erased it from a report. I served as a combat medic in Kandahar, from 2008 to 2010. I held the rank of specialist, until the day I made a decision that didn't fit the manual. I paused. No script to fall back on. Just truth. On that day, I broke protocol to save a man's life. I didn't do it for a medal. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because when someone is bleeding out in front of you, you move. You act. You don't wait for permission. I scanned the rows. Younger soldiers. Old commanders. Journalists halfway through scribbling. No one asked for my side of the story back then. And that's fine. I've made peace with it. What I haven't made peace with until now is the silence I carried. The kind that wears you down from the inside. I looked down at my hands. They didn't shake. I'm not here for redemption. I'm here to remind you that courage doesn't always look like medals or parades. Sometimes it looks like someone in a hallway unseen doing the right thing anyway. A pause. A breath. Then, I'm not asking you to rewrite history. I'm asking you to stop burying the people who made it. I stepped back from the mic. No applause. Just silence. The kind that said we heard you. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt whole. I didn't come to clear my name. I came to give it back to myself. The silence held for a moment longer after I stepped away from the mic. But I didn't sit. Something inside said I wasn't done, so I turned back. This time, no script. Just the memory I'd been carrying like a stone in my chest for 15 years. There was a night in Kandahar, I said. A recon unit was ambushed. 4 injured. 1 critical. The critical was a high-ranking officer, someone many of you know by name. A few heads tilted. Everyone already knew who. They brought him into the med tent. There was chaos. There was blood. There was no one giving orders. The medic on duty froze. The chopper wasn't coming. I swallowed. I didn't outrank anyone. I wasn't cleared for trauma command. But I looked at that man, bleeding eyes wide, and I moved. I looked down, then back up. I applied field stabilization using a method not listed in any manual. I did it because I had seen it work before. Because doing nothing would have meant his death. I paused. They say I disobeyed. I say I acted. No fire in my voice. No bitterness. Just weight. Just truth. I didn't name the medic who froze. I didn't tell them about the delay in dispatch. I didn't explain that the real failure that night wasn't me. It was fear. I kept quiet because I believed protecting the system meant something. A breath. And for that silence, I was dismissed. No trial. No inquiry. Just gone. I let the truth sit in the air. I'm not sharing this now because I want sympathy. I'm sharing it because for too long, stories like mine disappear. They dissolve into hallway gossip or get redacted from reports. I scan the crowd again. This isn't just about me. This is about every nurse, medic, cleaner, and corpsman who moved when no one else did, and was told later they shouldn't have. There was a tremor in someone's breath in the second row. I saw an older woman in uniform wipe the corner of her eye. I'm not angry, I said gently. Not anymore. I've carried anger, and I've carried silence. Silence is heavier. I nodded once. That's all. And with that, I stepped down. No drama, no crescendo. Just a woman walking off a stage, finally unburdened. Behind me, I heard it. Not clapping, not cheering, just the sound of people standing, one by one. And in the front row, Walter Kincaid rose to his feet and gave me the slowest, firmest nod I've ever seen. Not as a general, not as a man I once saved, but as someone who finally saw me. No one handed me flowers, but no one sat down either. I walked off the stage the same way I walked onto it, steady, quiet, alone. There was no escort waiting, no applause chasing me down the aisle. The microphones had turned to static, the cameras slowly lowered, and the MC had no prepared words for what had just happened. But no one sat down. They stayed on their feet, every last one of them, old soldiers with worn medals, young recruits barely past training, nurses, reporters, civilians in jackets too light for the wind, all standing, not in celebration, in recognition, not for rank, for truth, and that more than any ceremony was what I came for. I stepped through the curtain behind the platform and into the side corridor. Cool air, concrete floor, fluorescent lights humming like they always did in government buildings. Familiar, in a way that almost made me laugh. 15 years ago, I'd left through a hallway, just like this one back door. No send-off, no handshake. Today, same silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. Sarah was there leaning against the wall, hands in her coat pockets. No words, just a look. Like she saw something settle in me she hadn't seen before. "You did it," she said. I shook my head gently. "I didn't fix anything." "No," she replied. "You just told the truth. That's harder." We walked out together. At the bottom of the marble steps, a small group had gathered. Not a crowd, just faces. The 4 students from my quiet class. 2 nurses from the ICU. A man I didn't recognize wearing an Army field medic pin from 2003. They didn't speak. They didn't record. They just stood. Not in a line. Not for a photo. just present. Like they'd come to say, "We heard you, we believe you," and we needed it. The wind picked up slightly. Flags cracked in the air behind us. A faint bugle played from across the cemetery grounds. And still, they stood, not for protocol, not because they were told, but because something finally felt right. I nodded once, then stepped down the last stair. The past was still the past, but I wasn't walking under it anymore. I was walking forward. They gave me a badge this time, not for cleaning, for teaching. The first time I walked into that room, I was pushing a mop bucket. This time, I walked in with a marker. The hospital's small lecture wing hadn't been used much since COVID. A few old anatomy posters still clung to the corkboard, faded and curling at the corners. The projector buzzed when turned on like it hadn't been touched in years. But the chairs were full. 16 students. Most were nurses. A few paramedics. One trauma resident who admitted he'd watched my 8-minute video a dozen times. They weren't here for extra credit. They were here because word had spread. Not viral anymore. Just quietly, the way real things do. One person to another. I stood at the front. My name was already written on the whiteboard in dry erase ink instructor Margot Delaney, no quotation marks. No titles missing. Just a name finally where it belonged. The director of nursing introduced me briefly, reading a few lines that someone in PR had probably polished. I waited until she left the room. Then I erased half the board. "Let's get something straight," I said. "This isn't about certification. What I'll teach you won't show up on your licensing exams. You won't get points. You won't get extra pay." A few students exchanged nervous glances. And still, I added, "What you learn here might be the only thing standing between a patient and a body bag one day." The room went quiet. Then they leaned forward. I held up a red ribbon, torn, frayed about the length of my forearm. "This is what I used to tie off an artery in 2010. It wasn't standard. It wasn't approved. It worked." I let it fall to the table. "Today, we're going to talk about what works when the textbook doesn't help you. When the kit's missing half its tools. When the only thing between you and death is your hands." I pulled out the training dummy. The same one I'd used with Sarah and the others in that empty storage room. But this time, it wasn't secret. This time, it was scheduled. There were notebooks, and name tags, and eyes watching me, not like I was a ghost, but like I was real. Someone cleared their throat in the back. I turned. It was Sarah. She didn't say anything, just stood in the doorway, arms folded proud in that quiet way she'd always been. I nodded to her, then turned back to the class. "All right," I said. "Let's begin. Fear isn't weakness. What you do with it, that's the measure of who you are." Halfway through the session, we took a break. I sat at the edge of the table, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped hospital mug. The students chatted quietly, some flipping back through notes, some texting their shifts to let them know they'd be late. That's when she approached me. Young, maybe 26. Ponytail pulled so tight it made her look braver than she probably felt. She hesitated before speaking, then asked, "Can I ask you something off the record?" I nodded. "Were you scared?" I looked at her. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was asking because she needed permission to feel, to tremble, to doubt. Which time I asked gently. She blinked. "Any of them." I set the mug down. "Yeah," I said. I was scared. She looked almost surprised. I was scared when I first touched a man whose lungs were filling with his own blood. I was scared when I heard bullets outside the canvas walls. I was scared when I broke rules I knew could end my career. A pause. But that's not the fear that stayed with me. She leaned in a little. The fear that stuck, I said, was the kind that came later. Quiet. Long after the shouting stopped. The fear of knowing I was right, and still choosing silence. She didn't move, didn't blink. That fear I continued ate more of me than any court-martial ever could. I let that settle, because it's not the kind of truth you rush. Here's what no one tells you when you sign up for this job, I added. There will be moments when everyone looks to someone else, and you'll feel it, the pressure to wait, to defer, to let someone with more stripes make the call. I looked her dead in the eyes. And sometimes there won't be anyone else. Just you, just your hands, just the voice in your head saying, "Do something." She nodded slowly. "That's when you'll have a choice," I said. "Be afraid, or act through the fear." I picked the mug back up, took one last sip. "I've never regretted being afraid," I said. "Only the times I let it shut me up." She stood there a moment longer, then smiled, the kind that says thank you without words, and walked back to her seat. Some people write stories, others carry them in their bones. The book came out in the fall. Hardcover, midnight blue dust jacket, a photo of a medical field tent in low light blurred just enough to look symbolic. Title: The Cleaner Who Stayed by Sarah Kincaid. It hit the shelves quietly. No splashy interviews, no movie deal announcements. Just a few well-placed reviews in medical journals and veteran newsletters. But word traveled, because the story wasn't just about war. It was about one woman who disappeared and chose one day to step back into the light. They sent me a copy, wrapped in brown paper, no return label. Sarah had signed the inside cover in simple pen, "For Margot. The world may have forgotten, but I didn't." S. I placed it on the table next to my bed. Didn't open it. Not because I was angry, not because I didn't trust her words, but because I didn't need them. I had lived every page of that book in real time, with all its silences, its closed doors, its sharp-edged moments of clarity. I didn't need to see them polished, formatted typeset. I remembered the tent. I remembered the smell of antiseptic and blood. I remembered the exact weight of Walter's arm when it went limp, and the precise second it twitched back to life under my hands. I remembered the hallway, where I didn't speak up, and the stairwell, where I finally did. That story wasn't a headline to me. It was my spine. People asked me if it felt strange seeing my story on shelves and articles whispered in staff lounges. I said no. Strange was when no one saw it at all. Sarah came by the hospital one evening months after publication. She didn't mention the book, neither did I. Instead, she handed me a set of printed enrollment forms. "The first national field response training program," she said. "Your methods, your name on the syllabus, real funding, real backing." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure they're ready?" She smiled. "I think the better question is, are you—" I looked down at the papers. My name wasn't missing this time. It was at the top. Black ink, bold font. No footnotes, no asterisks. "Maybe I'll teach," I said. She nodded. "Maybe you already are." And with that, she was gone. I walked back to my small office, past the ICU I once snuck into when no one was looking. This time I paused, peeked through the glass. Inside, a new nurse adjusted a ventilator. Calm, focused, hands steady. She saw me, gave a nod, not of recognition exactly, but of something better. Respect. No statue, no plaque, just a photo and the truth scribbled in ink. The hallway near the staff break room had always been forgettable. Flickering lights, beige paint, a vending machine that only took singles if you ironed them flat first. But someone had started hanging photos there, snapshots of hospital life. No captions, just moments. One showed a surgeon asleep in a chair, head tilted back. Another, a nurse tying a child's shoelaces in the ER. And then there was mine. I didn't know they had taken it. It was old, probably 10, maybe 12 years ago. I was pushing the mop cart past ICU, one hand on the handle, the other holding a small clipboard. No face shown, just my back, my boots, and the quiet shape of someone who belonged to the floor, more than to the system. Taped to the bottom corner of the frame, someone had scribbled in black marker, "She was here." Just that. No name, no title. But it stopped me in my tracks, because somehow that was enough. All those years I thought I was invisible. Someone had seen. Not just now. Back then. And not for the moment I saved a general or taught a course or stood at a podium, but for the ordinary. For showing up. For walking the halls. For being present when no one else was. A quiet legacy built in scuffed linoleum and silence. I stood there for a long moment letting it land. Then someone walked by, young orderly, maybe new, glanced at the photo, then at me. "That you?" he asked. I smiled. "Yeah." He looked again. "Cool." And kept walking. That was enough too. Later that week I received a letter in my office mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "I used your method. It worked. I didn't panic. I remembered where you said to place my hand. He lived. Thank you. Nurse C, Arkansas. No spotlight. No stage. Just another life extended. Just another whisper through the hallways." I folded the letter, slipped it into my coat pocket, and went back to work. Somewhere someone was about to need someone like me, and this time they wouldn't have to look far. Because now I was no longer invisible. I was written in.